that he is the ladder that connects the heavenly to the earthly, and that connects the earthly to the heavenly. The whole purpose of God creating humans to be the perfect person, the perfect man, the perfect one, taken from dust and with the neshama fit together perfectly. Yeshua came to be that, and Yeshua comes to restore that. And we read about the pillar, and I would like to today. I'd like to talk about the pillar. Yes, that's Yeshua, but there's another pillar. Which one is it? And Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, when he's giving instructions to the young pastor Timotheus, the one who honors God, he talks about a potential delay in 1 Timothy. You don't have to read this. I'm going to have another text that I'm going to be my main text. He says, I write so that you may know how one ought to... 1 Timothy is Paul's instruction to the young pastor about, we're going to call it about synagogue life, church life, about assembly life. We're going to talk about some terms here. But he talks about what it means to be in the household of God. He says this is right that you may know how one ought to conduct himself, herself, themselves in the household of God. And he says, what is the household of God? Which is the church of the living God, which is the community of the living God, which is the assembly of the living God. Everyone say kahila. All right, you know what you just said? Okay. We say it again, kahila. Okay. Everybody say ecclesia. Now say assembly. Now say church. You technically just said 4 different ways to say the same thing, right? You went back to the Hebrew, you went back to the Greek, and then you went to a translation, assembly, which I think is probably more accurate. And then you went to another coined phrase that was developed in the 2nd century based upon this phrase. And we're going to talk about the church today. And we're going to talk about the assembly. And first of all, it's a little bit controversial just in the very terms in and of themselves in the Messianic community. First and foremost, just because there are some people that would say that, well, church is it's a pagan term and we shouldn't use the term church. Anybody tracking with that? Anybody heard that before? Hope you probably have. You've been exposed. Some of you have been exposed to Messianic Jewish thought, Messianic Jewish practice, and Messianic Judaism. It's I think on the big picture, is still in its early phases. But it's had to go through some growing pains, and some of the divisions and some of the strifes and things that we've seen in the Messianic community are all a part of these growing pains. But one of them has to just over with terminology. The term kahila, it's used extensively in the Torah to refer to a place of gathering. Whenever it says that Moses is going to gather the assembly together, it says kahal is the term that's used there. He assembled them together. It's an assembly. The term ecclesia is the Greek term that's used to translate that. It just means a gathering where people gather together. In fact, it was used in the book of Acts, and it was used particularly in reference to followers of Yeshua because they met at a particular place in the temple. This is where they would assemble. And so this term is used in reference to that. It's also controversial too, though. Why? Because when you see this term kahal, ecclesia, in the Old Testament, because there is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible called the Septuagint, and when we see that translated in the Old Testament, it always translates as, or usually translates as, assembly or congregation. But when you get to the New Testament, the apostolic writings, it's translated as church. And what does that seem to convey? That there's some kind of disconnect between the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and the original Israelite community of God, and now the new community. And I don't want to dismiss that there are some new things. And we know that God is doing something new, and he does something new in the book of Acts, and we see something very peculiar, and this is why I wanted us to spend some time in Acts when we did last year and going through it, because what is now incorporated into this ancient Israelite community is Gentiles, right? And one of the things peculiar in the book of Acts is that these Gentiles, the debate is, should they convert to Judaism? The answer to that is no. Because of that, that's going to, now there's one faith, there's one community, and these Gentiles are miraculously engrafted into the broader Jewish community. But because they don't convert to Judaism, it changes some of their status requirements in a sense, if you think about it as it relates to some specifics in the Torah. Because the Torah defines some things for the ancient Israelite community.